Okay, so our last class on Out of the Silent Planet, we are talking about the very last chapter, chapter 21, and we are talking about the postscript, which is, oh, I'm sorry, 21 and 22, my fault. So the last two chapters, and then the postscript, which is, almost as long as a chapter. So it's almost going to feel like three chapters, maybe not quite. So to just kind of remind us where we ended up, the trial of humanity, basically, in all of its fashions, has now concluded. It basically starts off with ransom being presented to Oyarsa by the residents of Malacandra, and being able to both kind of explain himself and humanity. And then it moved on to divine, which was very brief and mostly Weston. He spent a long time with that interaction between Oyarsa and Weston. Weston representing both himself as an individual, but also humanity kind of writ large. The humanity that in being bent and being twisted, and yet still with an aspirational element that could be rebent straight towards great good. If we recall, divine was bent in a way that he was basically broken and useless. He was an empty shell. All he was after was the money and the pleasure, and he was, in the grand scheme of things, little better than an animal. Weston was a great man with a great mind. Now that greatness doesn't mean any kind of goodness, because there wasn't much good about him at all. All that great was being used wrongly. He took virtues such as love of humanity, but it became an abstraction and then carried out into a degree where it actually became a terrible vice, a willingness to wipe out other people and civilizations just for the continuation of not just people, like I know you and I love you, therefore I want to protect you, but this super generic, incredibly vague sense of humanity as a whole. There's kind of a joking aphorism that I don't intend to be unkind, but I've heard this before and I've seen it applied in a few cases, and it kind of makes a little bit of sense. And it's mostly told again as an ironic joke, but the people who are the most concerned with humanity tend to not like people. You follow what I mean by that? Mm-hmm. About humanity and the goodness of humanity, and you must protect humanity, and they tend to be interpersonally kind of difficult and unpleasant.
That's true.
Some of us may know people, some of us may be related to people who don't like people very much.
Yeah, I think we are.
So that's kind of where I get, some of Weston, wrapping my head around the sort of guy that Weston is. Well, that trial has now ended. And the judgment of Oyarsa is they cannot stay. To stay would be to be disembodied, because their bentness has no place in Malacandra. They are permitted to go back home and stay and never again to return. And the Malacandrans, who actually have a very sophisticated technology, will repair the ship and supply it, but they're given a very hard cap. What is it, like 90 days or something? And that's all they get. And so the decision was made to try. And I think that fits very well with Weston. if you recall a very significant interaction between Weston and Oyarsa, where Weston basically chooses the side of the devil. Like if you present me between heaven and hell, God and the devil, Weston basically says, I choose the devil because the devil fights, the devil struggles, the devil might fail, but the devil is always grasping for more. And there was, in its kernel, in its deepest first essence, something positive about that, desire to determination that you're not quit or whatever. But again, it's become so twisted now that you would actually choose wickedness over goodness because you can't understand any better. So, but it sort of fits with Weston, like take a risk, take a chance. And so they agree. The three of them really, we're going to go back, even if it's not much of a chance at all, just because of the timing is wrong, the planets are not in a good position within their various orbits to try to try for the specific journey. I mean, if you remember back in the days of, at least I can remember shuttle launches, and you guys can remember deeper than that, and actual rocket launches, which I don't. But they were for very specific and precise times. And if anything ever happened where they had to scrub the launch, like, oh, there's rain, or there's, it's too cold, they didn't just do it for the next day. Like, we'll give ourselves 30 minutes and try it. Like, no, everything was exactly just so, right? Because you were talking about these millions of miles, and tiny changes in degree were magnified so much as to be these enormous differences in distance and in time. Completely. So it was not at all indifferent. You had to be extremely precise about how and when and exactly to do these things so that they all kind of intersected at the proper time. If you've ever shown a flashlight in a large room or from far away outside in the dark, you've noted that the lens of the flashlight may be only a couple of inches, but the further away you get, the broader the beam, even if it's a circle. Like you're shining it against the far wall, and you can still see a circle. But not a circle is much, much bigger because of the shape of the lens on the inside, and the light starts going outward at an angle, and you don't have to get very far at all for that shape to be completely different. If you've ever used a tape measure and you're trying to, measure something at a pretty 10, 15, 20 feet, if you get off square even a little bit, or you're not running exactly parallel to the wall, suddenly what looks like a very insignificant angle at the beginning, by the end, you're way off. We had a house that we bought in South Florida when we moved down there, and it was in horrible, horrible shape. It took us 11 months of working on it before we could move in, but it was a good deal. One of the things I remember very well was the awful tile job they did on the floor. We had to actually I had to pay for somebody to jackhammer it up because it was in such bad, it was so poorly done. But one of the things about laying tile is if the first piece isn't square to the walls in the room, by the time you get from one side to the other, a very tiny difference is really going to show up. So there are these rows of tiles, and they were all set just in square pattern. It was up against the wall where we had a sliding glass door, and on one side of the sliding glass door, the tile was like this. And by the time we got to the other end of just the sliding glass door, so you're talking like maybe 8 feet, the gap was like this. And they just put in like this giant wad of grout. But it was just this awful, terrible slant, like a big triangle. Because it's just one of those things, little tiny differences that seem very insignificant close up. When you magnify that over a long distance, suddenly the gaps become huge. So we're kind of fumbling around with this to say just how small of a chance that this journey back actually has. They're in the wrong position. It is the wrong time to try this, but they do it anyway. Okay. That kind of brings us to where we are, 21, 22, and our postscript. I want to say that the first paragraph of chapter 21 means the entire book to me. All that afternoon, Ransom remained alone, answering Oyarsa's questions. I'm not allowed to record this conversation beyond saying that the voice concluded it with the words, "You have shown me more wonders than are known in the whole of heaven." To think about this angelic being of such extraordinary power and ability. What could cause such a power to experience wonder and amazement?
Total innocence.
Not just total innocence, I mean, which is absolutely true, but that this cosmic entity basically could have never conceived of God's plan of the gospel for earth. Because that's what Branson's explaining. What Malacandra as Oyarsa, as the Oyarsa of Mars, as this super powerful, angelic, spiritual being who is in fellowship and communion with other spiritual and angelic beings all across the heavens, all they know of is the fall. And then that's it. The siege of earth, where, so just to backtrack real quickly, let me let our resident military historian, Sam, explain the concept, the military tactic of a siege real quick.
Oh boy. I guess, a siege would just be, surrounding an enemy, and basically causing them, starving them out. They've got no ability to bring resources in to sustain themselves. So eventually they'll just surrender because they're going to get hungry, or they're going to run out of some, supply or something.
Right. So, how do you capture, say, a castle or a fort or a stronghold? If they can get behind walls and be safe, you surround them so they can't get out. And then it becomes a waiting game. Who can wait longer? That's a siege. So what Oyarsa knows is the rebellion of Satan and the fall, the bentness of the planets in such a way that it actually impacts all the other planets. Remember, he talks about how there used to be life on the surface of Mars, but within the rebellion in heaven, even Mars is harmed through Lucifer's disobedience and struggle. And so the siege is kind of sealing them up. Okay, you've created a stronghold for yourself and you're not willing to come out. Well, we're going to keep you in there. So the last thing that Oyarsa knows is rebelliousness. It's the war. It's the negative consequence. And I am just always struck the incomprehensible beauty of the gospel if you could hear it for the first time. And that's what Ransom is offering to Oyarsa. what we completely take for granted, what you can't even live in this culture and not have, even if you're rejected utterly, you can't not have some sense of this. But all of this is completely brand new. And to hear about the wonder and the amazement, which we ought to have, we ought to hear the gospel and feel a sense of wonder and amazement. And it's our familiarity with it, I think, that makes that more difficult. But this is like seeing someone hear it for the first time. If you've never had that opportunity, there's nothing like it. But this is in such a grand cosmic scale. I mean, I just 20 years ago, maybe on the internet, when it was still relatively new, I stumbled across a blog. I don't think people blog anymore, but they, you write down your thoughts and articles and stuff, and you post them for the people to read. And this guy entitled his blog, quote, "Wonders for Oyarsa," based on this book. And it was like the most beautiful title for me. And it was a great blog, and I read it all the time. But what was probably a relatively rudimentary explanation of the biblical story. Ransom is no Bible scholar. He's a very bright man, very educated, but he's no theologian. He is no priest. He is no, scriptural scholar. He's just kind of sort of a churchman, a faithful churchman who is also an academic. But his ability to explain the gospel blows the mind of this angelic being. And I just love it. I think that's kind of at the heart of the whole book. Okay. So how does the time on Malacandra kind of end? Oyarsa sort of sets them up to go, and what's the setup? That kind of the last chapter and a half are about the journey. So what's kind of the conclusion of Malacandra?
Well, what surprised me, and it says that Ransom is surprised also, but Oyarsa evidently realized that Weston and Divine could not be trusted.
Oh yes, yeah. Oyarsa definitely understands that Weston and Divine cannot be trusted.
And so when they're he's telling Ransom, on your journey, we're going to protect you.
Yes.
And at the time, Ransom, he was kind of surprised. He didn't realize. I mean, it hadn't really dawned on him.
Sure.
Because of the lack, maybe food becoming scarce and oxygen depleting.
That's right.
That these two other men might do away with it.
Yeah. If you're in a sealed system and you're worried about running out of food, water, and oxygen, well, a good way
to get rid of somebody
is to reduce the expenses by a third. So Oyarsa basically promises protection. The El Deal will follow, and some will be even in the rocket itself, in the spacecraft, and making sure. Here's a little food for thought. Why does the need to protect himself not occur to Ransom?
I think he's kind of innocent still in a way, he doesn't really. Maybe he doesn't really realize how truly bent these other two characters are.
Now,
as bent as they are, and their thought process in case of an emergency.
So if you couldn't hear that, the suggestion was that his innocence doesn't allow him to kind of fully grasp how bent Weston and Divine truly are. The only pushback I'll say is he used to. Because remember, as soon as he found the knife on board ship, he kept it. And he was fully prepared to fight to the death, both inside the ship on the way there, or as soon as he got out of the ship. So why, on the way back, did that thought never occur to him?
I think he had lived with the creatures of Malacandria long enough that he had kind of adopted their way of thought. And even though each of the other creatures or species were different from them, they interacted well. And nobody thought anybody was out to get them.
Yeah.
That's the best way I could explain it. So he didn't really worry about, his own safety.
Yeah.
Other than getting there.
Yeah.
I thought it had to do also with the fact that they were going home. And the threat was he was being taken to this planet to be sacrificed. Well, he learned their ways, as Mary said, and became part of them. So the threat was gone.
Yeah.
And now he's going back home, and there was two parts to that. One is when he got home, there wasn't really a threat to him, but maybe they'd never make it anyway.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a suggestion here, at least. It's not explicit, and certainly wrong about it. I think there's a little innocence restored. Maybe through his confession of frailty and fear and his own sin and weakness to Oyarsa, and being kind of restored. His time on Malacandra has kind of restored some of that innocence, where he does think like they do, at least more than he used to. His reflexive perspective on the world was now shaped by Malacandra in a way that it wasn't before he got there. And he became naive in a sense, but in that positive way where the reflexive perspective of sin was kind of, I don't know, maybe restarted a little bit. I think I brought this up offhandedly in a different chapter, but I'm doing a class with some younger Boy Scouts, and within the class, it's a curriculum, and they get a patch and stuff, but it's sort of based off of this concept of a journey. You're taking a journey with Jesus, sort of thing, and you do it through your church, and as you talk about your faith and you learn about your denomination, and the way that they're supposed to take notes, they make a little project. They're supposed to be kind of like a travel log, and you can do postcards, or you can do like a little video postcard, or you can make a scrapbook kind of thing. But the whole concept of a journey and a trip and a vacation. And so I remember telling them to just kind of get them oriented to that concept of thinking about a trip that they took that was really great or really memorable, and what did you do and why was it memorable, and the activities that they did, and was you taking pictures, and why, so you could look at it when you were done and remember and share it with other people, and then trying to bring it around to connect to the class to say that the best trips that we take are the ones that change us, that you come back from the trip different than the person that you started off. Those are the most memorable trips. And when you take a picture and you look at it later, it recaptures a little bit of, I'm not quite the same person I was before I saw those things or experienced those things. And I think that's been the case for Ransom. The Ransom who is headed back to Earth is not the same Ransom who came from Earth. Now, in all the ways I couldn't tell you, but I think in some very fundamental ones, that is true. He has been exposed to the heavens. He has been exposed to a complete culture and civilization where sin just basically doesn't exist. He has been exposed to this deeper spiritual reality of the universe, in some ways face to face. And he's just a different person. And maybe that's the sort of person who looks and thinks a little more like a Malacandran than he ever did before. I don't know, just kind of sort of a neat thought. Why would he need to be protected? Well, Weston and Divine, I don't think were changed,
No.
right? I think these are the same guys they were when they left. hang on. All right, so yeah, I think that's kind of where we are. Now, I want to suggest that maybe Weston could be different. I'm just not so sure his difference is any better. Weston has learned some things. Remember, Weston in his trial spent the first several pages convinced it was a trick. Remember, he thought that like one of the older creatures were, using ventriloquism, or he thought they were primitive savages who were like stupid children, or I mean, he's been confronted with powers and abilities beyond his own, but he came out swinging still. And I want to suggest that maybe Weston is also changed. I'm just not going to suggest that it's all positive like Ransom's changed. I don't know that Divine is at all different. My guess is Divine is who he is, and that's all there is to it, because there wasn't much there to begin with. There's also something that happens in this discussion that brings me back to correct one of my statements, and I'll say that it's my faulty memory and not reading ahead, but Marion, it was either you or Tom who had asked several chapters ago about, I made some kind of comment about the nature of El Deal. Well, what would the El Deal of Earth be like? If the Oyarsa of Earth is Lucifer, then what would the El Deal be like? They would be like demons. And that seemed overly harsh. And I think you were the ones, one of the two of you were kind of like, wait a second. And I think we get confirmation for your point of view that Oyarsa himself was not really aware of. That there are El Deal who are somehow able to get onto Tholkandra, the silent planet, but he himself was unaware of that. He's able to kind of piece it together based off of, well, I think what Ransom told him. So are all of the spiritual forces present within our planet all bent? The answer would be no. But
back up to your thought that Weston was changed individual as a result of this experience. When the craft landed, he and Divine, I would assume, took the gold that they brought back, and away they went without any concern for the situation. They abandoned it in the ship.
yes.
I don't see where his selfish attitude has changed.
No, I don't think that it has, or if it has, it hasn't changed for the better. So I would say we can change in all sorts of ways, and not all of them good. If we change, say, 20% differently than we used to be, well, that sounds good if you're changing to be 20% better. What happens if you become 20% worse? Now, being 20% more selfish still leads him to leave Ransom to his likely death. I'm going to suggest if if Weston has changed, which I think he might have, because remember, Weston is smart and Weston is honest. He's maybe become more certain and aggressive of his stance, because now he knows that there is a genuine enemy to him. Like, I think Ransom would see Oyarsa maybe not as a friend, but as an ally. Like, this is someone who is either on my side or I could be on his side because he's on the side of God. Whereas Weston, I think, could now put some kind of personification to, there really is something resisting my will. I want humanity to go conquer the universe and so on and so forth. And there's really something out there that doesn't want me to do that. That can either scare me into flying straight, or it could harden me into trying harder. Does that make sense when I say change?
I don't know.
No?
I don't think he can hear you, Tom.
I said, I don't know.
We don't get a lot from Weston from here on out. I'm making a suggestion that Ransom has definitely changed because we spend time with him and we can see that. We don't really spend any more time with Weston and Divine other than watching them desperately try to get the ship back. But it's more just an open thought and a suggestion. I think Divine has little hope for change. I think Weston could change, but would that change be for the better? To bend back to becoming straight? Or could it bend him even further away? And I don't think Weston's any better than he was, but he might be a little worse.
I will accept a softening of his attitude towards Ransom. He allowed him to navigate under his direction, which he certainly wouldn't have done on their journey from the Earth.
For sure.
But I don't know whether this was a matter of him trusting him more, or just it relieved him of some Weston of some of the tireless association with the navigation part of the trip.
This even though it was only just like a chapter, I felt the length of the journey more on the way back than I did on the way there. You know, the way there, and maybe it's because Ransom was always confused about what was going on and couldn't really tell the time, but it seemed very indeterminate. A period of time had passed, kind of a long period of time. But I was never completely clear how long it took them from the Earth to Mars the first time. But this time you feel like every week tick by. You feel the pressure of the 3 months and trying to push to the very end.
And the fact that they had a time limit made it very crucial. And they had to pass by the sun very, very closely, which was extremely miserable.
Right. So if anybody was a little confused by that, the way that I kind of pictured in my head is like when you see a drawing where people make like the concentric circles of the solar system and the sun is in the middle, and then there's Mercury and then Venus and then Earth, and you can kind of see their orbits getting bigger. Well, when they took the journey from the Earth to Mars the first time, maybe Earth and Mars, like the sun was here and then Earth and then Mars, and it was kind of, they were sort of in a line with each other. But then remember that they revolve around the sun at different rates. And so it seems like they were in opposition, meaning, you know, here's the sun in the center, and Earth was on one side and Mars was on the other. So instead of being here, it was here. So not only was it the distance greater, but the only way to try to cut the corner was to go way closer to the sun. They were going away from the sun maybe the first time, because remember, Mars is further away. But now that you have to, like, if you're not close, then you have to, and they, you know, an unbearable heat, and we feel it build with them. We're gonna die. We can't get any hotter. You ever felt that way? I can't get any hotter than I currently am. There's a funny sense of freedom and being at a limit of something. I had an interment in the Memorial Garden last Saturday, just a brief thing. It was scheduled because the people were from out of town. And the service itself was very brief. We waited for family to arrive. We were running late. And it started to storm. And initially under the trees, we were okay. And then it really opened up. And within seconds, I was completely drenched. You can recall the service, there's the ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and I dropped some, so yeah, it was mud to mud, mud to mud. It was unbelievably wet. But when it first starts, you feel the tension rise. Can we finish in time? Can I get out of here? What's going to happen? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to get better? But then you hit that point of saturation where you just like, okay, whatever. Can't get any wetter. Might as well just take my time and finish. You ever get caught in a sudden rainstorm getting from like a store to your car in the parking lot? And you think like, if I run fast enough, maybe I can make it. But you ever get to the point where you're like, you know what, forget it. I can't, I'm not gonna get any wetter now. I might as well walk.
And the last thing, you'll have to puddle about this deep.
Yeah, right before you get in. So they get so close to the sun, they're about to die. And he even kind of, I think, says it like, we're either gonna die or we're gonna live. It's either gonna get hotter and kill us, or it's gonna get cooler and we'll have a chance. And right on the balance, and it does. They just make it. And then they can see the earth. And for the first time, there's kind of some excitement and there's kind of some, not just relief, but maybe even a little exuberance for what happens.
I think that had to do a lot with Weston's very complicated calculations, because he had to figure out just how close he could dare to come to the sun without actually burning them up or killing them. And then once he got to the other side, it was kind of a moot point, you know, because he knew that they would be disembodied if they didn't make it on that particular day.
Yes.
So after that, it was just like, well, it is what it is.
It's a little unclear to us because it's unclear to Ransom exactly what happens. They get closer and closer and closer, and then all of a sudden he can tell they're now getting further away. Something went wrong. Some kind of gravitational pull, some kind of tiny error in calculation, or just something happened, and now they're going to miss, and they just basically almost quit. They just sort of break down and cry, and now it's over. Is Ransom asleep at the end? Is that what happens? Or is he just unconscious?
One or the other, probably asleep.
So something happens and he's not able to stay awake to the bitter end. He's kind of resigned himself to being disembodied out in space. He's a little regretful that the few things he would bring back from Malacandra, like the language and some of the culture, are going to be lost. No one else will ever know. But ultimately, he's content. He is at peace, a peace which passeth understanding. I think maybe he passes out because they're running low on oxygen. They make a mention to Eric feels bad because they've cut to every margin conceivable. And he probably is just kind of passing out and blacks out, and then he's awake. And what does he hear? Rain. And if there's rain, where are you?
Earth.
And so he hurries out. What happens to the ship? Boom.
Disintegrates.
So it's gone. And that mode of conveyance will never again take people from Earth to Mars. And this Ransom, who has been so fundamentally changed on his trip, walks back into town after, how long has this been? No, altogether. When did they leave the Earth?
Oh,
Has it been maybe a year or so? It must have been a long time.
It was 3 months just getting back.
Just getting back was 3 months. And he clearly spent, he spent the longest time with Harassa, long enough to learn their language and to become acquainted with their culture and the people.
Yeah.
So, you know, the journey there, their time there, and then the 3 months back. So he's been away for a long
was
time.
3 months going over.
Yeah. I want to say that I never doubted for 1 minute that they wouldn't get back to Earth. I had total confidence that they would.
Well, fine. And you're the guy who watches the movie or sees a television show who knows the star's not going to get killed, so you never feel the tension. I get it, but it's really brought home that Ransom was going to make it in our postscript. And as soon as I walked in, I got a couple of questions about the postscript. So I'm thinking that's where we are now, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Who wants to take a stab at explaining the postscript to the group?
I gotta take a quick look at it.
All right. The request is for me to explain the postscript. So here we go. This is it's a literary device where you read a novel, you read a work of fiction, and at the end, the author sort of whispers to you, the reader, to say, this was a true story after all. So that's really the purpose of the postscript. The postscript is written as though C.S. Lewis, as a person, had a friend who was going by the pseudonym of Elwin Ransom. And through a set of circumstances, C.S. Lewis, the author, becomes acquainted with Ransom, figures out, they figure out they've got this mutual interest, and Ransom lets him in on a secret, which is the story we just read. So the suggestion of the postscript is this all really happened, but the names have been changed so that number one, it could be published, and number two, so that the work could continue. If they used real names, not only were they liable to things like a lawsuit, but by making it a story, people are more willing to read a story, think, wow, that was a great story. I wish it were true. What do you mean it is? Versus being told, I'm going to tell you a true story, but it sounds crazy. You're never going to believe it. So this is kind of the setup he's given us. We, as the readers, are being led in on the secret that God is on the move, and that the siege of our world that we may have never even realized we were a part of, that big things are changing. And this story is a part of it. And once you know, you can be a part of it too.
part of the change.
That's right. How's that for the broad explanation?
Which is the setup for the next travel.
Kind of, yeah, right.
Have you thought, I think it's very interesting. I've been reading that they actually have, by putting together a lot of data from all around the world, telescopes from all around the world, that they have now got a picture of black holes. They know it exists. There is
Okay.
such a thing. They're also, and they've been keeping it hush hush for many years. It doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. It never happened. But there have been too many pilots, military pilots. There's something else that's flying around, and they have not an exact name for it. they
Uh-huh.
don't even know what it is. But there are mysteries in this world that we don't
Sure.
know about, we don't understand. And the government doesn't understand. So they just say, oh, it doesn't exist. No, well, no, well, we're not looking into that. And
Right.
we looked into it for a little while and no, it's not valid. And even, but the authorities, they grab the logs, they grab the radar, readouts and whatever have you, about whatever this is out there. I don't know what it is, and I don't think anyone has any good idea whatsoever. There are strange things that happen in this world we can't explain.
So imagine that this book then is sort of your initiation into some of the mysteries of the universe. You started off by reading a novel and it was interesting, kind of got your attention and made you think about stuff. And it gets to the end and it basically says, all right, now you understand, this is the first step in realizing how the world really works. And now that you know, what are you going to do about it? Now that you have encountered space as something that's not cold and indifferent, full of the heavens and the glory of God, now that you know that these spiritual realities are true, now that you know that there is an epic struggle of dark rebellion against light and wickedness and being bent against goodness and truth, now that you know these aren't just stories, but it's part of a cosmic struggle that means everything, you have a place in it too. And if I sat down and I told you those things, you could never believe or accept and understand them. But we brought you in through the magic of a story. And once the story was complete, once the story had sparked your imagination, once the story had opened up your hearts, well, now you're ready to hear the next step. And that next step involves you and your place within the struggle between darkness and light and wickedness and goodness and all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of it's a literary device. But it's kind of a fun little twist at the end to kind of take some of the themes that we've talked about and maybe kind of captivate us a little bit, maybe lit a spark and say, well, now do something with it. Don't just read it as a story and leave it at that and walk away. Could anything about this make an actual difference? And so that's why, he kind of ups the ante here and basically explains that, for those of us who remember the Matrix movies, we've been offered the red pill or the blue pill. You take the blue pill and you forget everything and you go back to the way that ordinary life used to be. But you take a red pill, not only will you remember everything you've learned, but you're about to go even deeper and find out more still. So do you want what you assume is happiness, or do you want the truth? And so that's kind of how he's writing is, I have told you this mysterious truth, not just about your world, but about the universe as a whole. Now, speaking of mysteries, this is just the right point for me to remind us that the word sacrament, the outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace, such as the sacrament of the Eucharist, where the bread and the wine are the body and the blood. The outward sign is a liquid and a substance, and it's eating it and taking it in. The spiritual reality is the sacrifice of Christ. It is his grace that transforms from the inside out. So that word comes from the Latin sacramentum, sacrament, but that Latin is not original. That's the translation of a Greek word. That Greek word is scattered throughout the New Testament. If, depending on your translation, King James, Revised Standard, I believe, still use sacrament. Whenever you see the word sacrament, the Greek word is mysterion, which can be very easily translated into mystery. As a matter of fact, the Church of the East does not call them holy sacraments. It calls them holy mysteries. So this is a mystery that we have been, given some insight into the mystery of how God relates not just with our world, but all of his creation throughout the universe. So what will knowledge of that mystery do for us? What else?
Yes, Lois is unbelievable. Absolutely. It's so brilliant.
Yeah.
But I understand yes, his colleagues are also.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He was.
That's
unbelievable.
that's one of the wonderful things that I love about his biography is imagining those incredibly high-powered intellects, meshing and clashing and fighting and arguing and also sharpening one another, and that just seems so neat to me. So what else?
I have a question. In the chapter 22, the person, I'm assuming it's the author in that end part,
Yes.
says that, where is it here? Talking about Weston, it says Weston, and it's in kind of quotes, or the force or forces behind Weston will play a very important part in the events of the next few centuries.
Yes.
And then it goes on to say, more than this, it would be unwise to say. Is that just a setup for the second book, or are we supposed to read more into that?
I'm going to say it's not really a setup for the next book. He wrote this book not expecting a sequel. He chose to write a sequel because he figured out an idea to make it make sense. I think it's two things. Number one is a literary device. Again, in the same way that I have initiated you into a mystery by revealing at the end that this fictional story was true. That's another literary device where it says, well, there's more to come, but I can't tell you now. And part of that is it's just plot writing. But the other part is, beyond the hints to a larger world, as that kind of gives us world building. It's literary world building. But the other hint is it's a reminder, and I think this is more explicit, it's a reminder that this story is a smaller part of a larger whole. That this cosmic battle is an ongoing thing to which this is a very brief moment. It may be a pivotal moment. There's I forget the name of the book, a neat little book, but it was about these smaller revolutionary wars. And it uses this repeated phrase called the little stone bridge. And the idea was, it doesn't look like anything. It's just a little stone bridge. So why would people, sometimes even neighbors, fight over who stands on the little stone bridge? Because as it turns out, home and our world is made up of little stone bridges, little things that seem insignificant, but that's what makes up what we know and what we love. They're both representative. Every little stone bridge means something more than that. It means my home, it means my family, it means my community, it means the people that I know and the places that I'm familiar with. But it also means, tactical and strategic things as well. The little stone bridge might be in between two places that you need to be. It might be a high place that allows you to see what's going on. It might be a way to stop or continue the flow of goods. Small things can actually be very significant. And so this story, even if it's a year-long story, within the scope of the universe and that cosmic struggle between darkness and light, is a very small thing. But it also may be exceptionally pivotal. More things are connected to this than we might be able to understand. So it wouldn't be wise to talk about that right now. We just kind of need to get you started. So I think that's kind of what he means by that.
I have a question.
Yeah,
The sentence said, the Platonists were living in the same celestial year
yes,
as ourselves.
correct. So remember, this is a pivotal celestial year. That seems to be evident to Oyarsa. Things are happening now in this year. Well, a celestial year is not an earthly year. The psalmist saying that that 1,000 years are like a day to the Lord. So a celestial year is this very long period of earthly time. So to say this is a pivotal celestial year doesn't necessarily mean, well, like 1956 or whatever when this was written. It really means centuries of human understanding, or potentially even longer. Because remember, Oyarsa talks about the ancient carving of all of the civilizations. It was a copy of 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 a copy. It was copied before your world had any life on it.
That's funny, that same thing came up in the book that I'm reading right now, that is about Egyptology and the diggings and so forth.
So, and that brings me to this other little point. So in 22, we see the intersection of like the real world and the story with, C.S. Lewis, the author, meeting Ransom. And it's because he's sort of vaguely acquainted with Ransom. He knows his background as a philologist. C.S. Lewis has come across this weird word he doesn't quite understand. So he's just kind of asking him as a professional courtesy. And Ransom is sort of feeling him out. Is this a guy that I can reveal this mystery to or not? Because the word that in the story the author comes across is Oyarsa. He finds within the writings of a 12th century monk, Oyarsa. Well, it's, again, we are part of a larger story. This story is a part of a larger story. But our own lives are part of a larger story. Sometimes if we actually open our minds to how expansive this story is and our part in it, it would be almost incomprehensible. But basically, this concept of Oyarsa being thought of and talked about 1,000 years ago, which is true. These people exist. Like this guy, Bernardus Sylvestris, was a real person. The work that he wrote is a real work. C.S. Lewis himself is something of a Neoplatonist. The biggest thing about understanding this concept of Platonism or Neoplatonism is the belief in a spiritual reality that is somehow more real than the physical reality that we perceive. There is the essence of what we perceive in the physical reality is a connection to an eternal world, which we see only in shadows and fragments, but does exist. Through a glass darkly, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
What was that comment?
Through a glass darkly. So let me throw out one more little connection here to this word. So this is what he's saying. It occurs in the description of a voice of the heavens, and in Oyarsis seems to be a quote intelligence or tutelary spirit of a heavenly sphere, in our language of a planet. I asked him about it, and they start kind of poking around with the language part of it. An intelligence, a spiritual, not just a guide, but like a spiritual responsibility, or something that has spiritual responsibility over an entire planet. So the Oyarsa of Mars, like Mars is his responsibility. It brings me immediately back to Colossians and Ephesians and talking about authorities, principalities, and powers. And it brings me to hymn 686. What's the actual verse? Archangels, angels, choirs. This is an insight into the heavenly realms where there's a hierarchy even there.
And they have different jobs.
Different roles, but the concept of, what's a power versus a principality, what's an authority. I've never been real great on all the different schemas of spiritual beings, but oh, greater than the seraphim, oh, greater than the cherubim, sing their praises, hallelujah. Talking about these dominions and authorities and principalities, talking about these spiritual realms, and here is a glimpse within the cosmos of how they actually work. And so, anyway.
What it reminds me of is the more you study the Bible, the deeper you understand, or the more you understand. And the cosmos, almost more you understand about the universe.
Yes.
It's like I came to Christ just through faith. I never doubted it. I can't tell you exactly when it happened or why it happened, but we were in another study I was doing. They were talking about going deeper in understanding of the universe and going into some videos that are done by theological minds much greater than mine or most anybody I know about. And they were talking about how the universe is so perfect. The sun is exactly the right distance away, and the moon and the other planets, and the fact that it was created to revolve on an axis. And if any of that ever got out of its position, just a tiny little bit, how it would all crash. But it doesn't happen because, as we believe, God is the person who created it, and also every day keeps it going the way it's supposed to.
Yes.
And mankind is always trying to play with it, in that all of the environment of some are destroying the climate or the environment through the climate and all of the things that we use here on Earth, and yet there's others that are trying to protect from another perspective. And all of that is still part of God's creation. I mean, he allows all of that to happen because he knows exactly what's going to happen with all of that. We don't, but he does.
And it all fits and it all works.
It all fits and it all works. And that's what I got out of this last part of, for C.S. Lewis, it maybe was just a sense of he was going deeper in his understanding of God and what God is doing in the universe. And maybe God has chosen him to write about that so that we that read the book and study it get a deeper meaning of what is happening in the universe and what the universe is
Yeah, we've been initiated into that holy mystery of all of the world residing in the palm of God's hand. So now what are you going to do about it? And that's how the little twist at the end. So I got my hymn number wrong. I apologize. It was 618. But that first verse that you ought to know at least. Ye watchers and ye holy ones, bright seraphs, cherubims, and thrones, raise the glad strain, alleluia. Cry out dominions, princedoms, powers, virtues, archangels, angels, choirs.
Yeah, so seven, or the seven.
Right, yeah, however that scheme is all laid out.
Yeah.
But yeah, getting a glimpse that not just space, but the heavens, and the heavens declare the glory of God.
You know what's interesting too, is Lucifer was, he's called angel of light, and he had very special powers, and they think that he was, they said something about his pipes, in other words, he must have had special talents that other angels, or whatever his rank was, did not have. Now, probably, I've often wondered that if his special powers and special talents and gifts were what made him think that he was so special.
Well, here we see the identification with Weston. Weston, who's a great man. Weston, who is brilliant beyond almost all others living today, and yet uses that remarkable ability and power in all the wrong ways. And if anything, that remarkable ability and power justifies his bad behavior to himself. It's not only my right to act this way, it's my duty. Because I have this ability, I must. Now,
That's what's been in the minds of some of these terrible people that have tried to like Hitler.
absolutely. Yeah, well, it's a responsibility that I have to be in control. I have to be a dictator. I have to be in charge because no one else could. You certainly can't. It's up to me. And that is the greatness of Weston, which has deceived him into assuming that it is both a necessity and that greatness is goodness, and it's not. That's something that I've pondered through for many years, and I push back against on a regular basis. The greatness and goodness can certainly intersect, and they ought to, but they don't always. So here we are at the end. We have been initiated into the holy mysteries of how the world and how the universe truly works. We are surrounded all the time by unseen forces, some of which are pointing to the glory of God, and some of which are twisted and bent away and want nothing more than for us to be bent as well. But this is a struggle that's not only personal to each individual, but it is also throughout the cosmos itself.
It impacts everything.
Everything has been touched and influenced, but the story is not done yet, and big things are happening within this celestial year, and however long that lasts. But maybe, just maybe, the siege is coming to an end, and there will be more wonders for Oyarsa and for all of us, because God's plan is still being worked out. Okay, how do we do?
Great.
So we need 3 weeks.
All right, so if we're not going to get together for a few weeks, now is the time. Are we just going to move ahead with the next book?
Yeah.
Okay, so we ought to be looking then. So it's all of next week I'm gone, then I'm back, then I'm gone. So the soonest we could start again would be August 4th. So why don't we?
No, we're not gonna be here in August.
Not going to be here in August at all?
We're going to be gone the full month of August.
Okay. Let's play it by ear then. We don't have to make a decision on starting anything anytime soon.
But
We're up for the next book.
we can play catch up.
Yeah. Well, you guys let me know if you want me to order books or not. You can certainly get them yourself. But if you would like me to get, I can order a handful and we can go from there. But we will start that next one, Paralandra, where we will meet some new faces and some familiar ones. And the story will continue. All right, good. All right.
Have a good week.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.